Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Applied Data Governance, a Day in the Life of a Technical Data Steward. I would like to start by introducing you to today's speakers. We have Jack Spivak. Jack is a Semantic Solutions Architect with Top Quadrant. We also have Jesse Lambert, who is also a Semantic Solutions Architect with Top Quadrant. Today's webinar is the second in a series that is spotlighting applied data governance. In part 2, we transition to a day in the life of a technical data steward, where the focus will be on automated data profiling. Our first webinar focused on a day in the life of a business steward. You'll notice that there's a link at the bottom of the slide here that will direct you to that first webinar recording, or you simply can go to the topquadrant.com website, click on resources, and then webinars. Before we get started, let's review a few logistical items. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along by using your GoToWebinar controls. To post questions, please look on the right-hand side control panel. You should see a drop-down box for questions, and if you click on that box, you should be able to post your question at any time during today's presentation. We will address as many of those as time allows at the conclusion of the webinar. We will also be recording today's webinar, and we'll send a link to that recorded version. With that, I will hand it over to Jack to get us started. Jack?
All right. Thank you, Christy. Let's move right into today's program about applied data governance with Top-Rate Edge. A few words first about Top Quadrant. We believe that capturing the meaning of information is essential to good decision-making, and it's our strong commitment to standard-based approaches to data semantics that makes this possible. Our mission, simply, is to make enterprise information meaningful. In today's webinar, we're going to be demoing how Top-Rate Edge technologies create meaningful relationships in enterprise information to help speed and ensure effective data governance in real-world applications. We have substantial experience with many large clients and government agencies, and what we actually do is implement Top-Rate Edge to build enterprise governance infrastructures that meet strategic and regulatory requirements. Our systems are used in many sectors. You can see a few here, and financial services has been an especially significant focus area recently because governance is so essential to respond to the increasing complexity of compliance requirements. I'm going to start with a problem today, and it's this. Information assets are more critical to strategic and operational decision-making than ever before. One of the greatest challenges facing enterprise today is that finding, trusting, and understanding this information is increasingly problematic. For it to be valuable, actionable information needs to be available and trustworthy, and often it's not. At least not easily. Instead, it's typically fragmented, confusing, and partial, putting critical decisions at risk. Actionable understanding that produces good results requires that we connect the business, technical, and operational metadata. We need to bring what's known about assets into a single data landscape. Effective data governance is about connection. It brings disparate information together meaningfully with people, processes, and technology. And Top-Rate Edge enables connection so that data professionals can unify this data landscape to find, use, and control enterprise data effectively. Jesse is about to demonstrate what's actually involved in practice. But before he does, I just want to touch on a couple of concepts to help clarify where he'll be taking it. Top-Rate Edge uses a notion of assets to connect metadata about the business, its technology, and its operations to a convenient, standardized model describing enterprise information. This model is quite rich. It has hundreds of different asset types and properties available, but it's also fully extensible because all enterprises pose unique challenges. Top-Rate Edge workflows make it possible to govern these assets in consistent and appropriate ways. With proper role authority, workflows can be defined to standardize the procedural rules for executing basic governance activities. And you can see a few here. Once assets and basic workflows are defined within Edge, additional workflows can be used to enforce policies, drive notifications, and specify performance metrics that can be monitored to ensure proper information management. And you'll see just a little about that. Collectively, top-rate edge assets, governance workflows, dashboards, and visualizations enable your governance teams to easily collaborate, catalog, connect, and curate your data. Top-rate edge actually redefines data governance, cultivating the connections that turn rough data landscapes into synergistic information ecosystems. This all sounds great, but I'm going to shift gears now because today's demo starts here. We're going to take a look at how all this happens in the real world. And we want our demo to start with people in real-world situations. So we're going to dive into a day in the life of Joseph, who's a technical data steward. Jesse will be using top-rate edge as Joseph to collaborate with Bob, the data governance officer. And I'm going to orient you just a little to Joseph's day. His work will be extending the synergy I just described a moment ago, because doing it with top-rate edge will enable him to see what he needs to see, in this case, glossary descriptions and tasks created by Bob, to do what he needs to do, which is going to be to automate the mapping of ingested metadata using predefined business rules, and to understand what they're doing because the glossary definitions are going to help clarify this. Finally, he's going to be extending the value of his work by sharing it easily across the organization where other colleagues can access it. Joseph's life today will involve using top-rate edge to automatically ingest, document, and profile metadata about a human resources database, and add connections to an existing glossary so that others can benefit. Joseph will be collaborating with Bob, the data governance officer, who will be assigning, reviewing, and is responsible for Joseph's work. Finally, just want to hit this point again, good data governance is about connection, and the work that Joseph does here, cataloging and drawing relationships between things in different domains, can deliver synergy if it's governed to be easily understandable. Joseph will make newly cataloged operational metadata meaningful across the company by connecting it to a business-level glossary of enterprise terminology that a business data steward created in our last webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jesse, to be Joseph for today's demo.
Thanks, Jack, and good day, everyone. As soon as I get my screen shared here, everyone should be seeing the top-rate edge homepage. So the last time in this series, I was playing the role of Jesse, the business steward, and Sean, our SME, subject matter expert, as they collaborated in the development of a business glossary. At the end of that webinar, we quickly showed how that glossary can enrich a data asset collection. We're playing with the Northwinds data set that we'll actually see later in this presentation as well. We're going to take that concept of using the glossary to enrich a data asset collection a little bit further today. So I'm playing Joseph, as Jack said, Joseph, the technical data steward. And it's my job as a technical data steward to implement policies and resolve issues. So sitting down with Edge today, the first thing I would like to do is go over to find any tasks that have been entered into the system. I actually have a quick view here on the home page, but if I go to find tasks, I can filter down all of the tasks to those that are just associated to me. So I'll filter by Joseph, and we'll see we have this one task in the system. I can see that Bob, who I know is our data governance officer, has given me till the 21st to, what does he need me to do? Okay, he needs me to pull in an HR database that's not being governed right now, profile it, document it, and make sure that it's ready for use. To get a little bit more information about this task, I can actually conveniently navigate to the issue that this task is assigned to. So all I have to do is click on the issue, and on the right-hand side here, you're now seeing the metadata about the issue. And I can see right here that it's the employees records database specifically that I need to bring in. And there's already a glossary available for me to help me get my job done quicker. And what's nice is the glossary is already in Edge, and I can collaborate with the people that created it. We know that Jesse and Sean are probably the ones that created this glossary, so I can comment, task, I can get into a workflow with them, whatever it takes to get my job done. So the glossary is available to me, the right folks are available to me, and I know what my job is because I had the task. A little bit more connection building here. It's an issue, that's great, but this issue is actually connected to a policy. So if I really needed to get the full picture, the full understanding of what is trying to be implemented here, TopRate Edge has the policy information in it as well. So I can click on this and we'll see the policy metadata. And this can be as rich as necessary, connected to other things. And the most important thing here for me is the description. All databases should be under IT governance with the full metadata available. So let's get to it. We know that we need to create a container here in TopRate Edge to centralize that metadata so we can connect it with all of these other good things. So what I'll do is I'll navigate back to the home page. I can get there from the breadcrumbs at the top of the page here where my mouse is. So I'll click on home, and my favorite place to come in and actually access my work and where things are nice and organized for me is under the governance areas. And this page gives me a nice view of the roles and the work that's being done in different tiers. A lot of different departments can actually collaborate and work here very well. And my area specifically is the employees data domain. So by clicking on the employees data domain here in this tree, you see I'm the technical data steward. Above me in the same container basically is our data governor, our data governance officer, Bob. And I have nice convenient access to the different assets that, that make up the employee data domain. Now the one that's not here is the employees database that from the HR system that I have the task to do. So I have a convenience capability here to just create a new data asset collection. Now it's called a data asset collection because it's collecting metadata about data assets, such as tables and schemas and columns and the relationships between them and a lot of the metadata. So I'm going to create, let's call this the employee records, and I will provide a nice rich description about this data asset collection so that everyone is aware of what needs to be getting done here. And for the data types that actually come in with this data set, whenever I pull it from the actual source itself, I'm going to allow certain data type metadata to go into and map to the standard SQL data types data collection. And I can create this. I'll get my OK, and here we are. Now, TopRate Edge is smart enough to know to tell me this is an empty container. You're probably going to want to make a connection. You're probably going to want to import something, and we'll do that via jdbc. But it's my company's policy to make sure that everything is being done in a controlled environment. So TopRate Edge gives me workflows. Let's go over to the workflows tab. Before I import, I want to make sure that I'm capturing all of my work in a controlled workflow where there's actually a working copy right behind the workflow mechanism that is basically a replica or a sandbox of the production copy known as employee records. So I'll be doing my work in this sandbox, and whenever it's all approved, we can commit it and actually get that into the production copy of the employee records. And when I say production copy, think of that as the gold copy. TopRate Edge wants to always be making sure that the gold copy of an asset collection is available for everyone. And to get there, I'll do that through a workflow. So I can start a new workflow here. And workflows are, there's a few pre-built. We have others that are available. And these are customizable. You can build these to be as simple or as complex as you need to for your requirements, and get any level of approval or review or freezing, any gated process to be put into place. But for us today, the basic review workflow will be perfect. Employee data workflow. And I'll also describe the work that I'm going to do today in this workflow so that everyone's aware of what's going on in this workflow. And I can submit this, click OK. And on this page, whenever this populates, we'll get a bit of a visualization of what the actual workflow is going to be. And you can see it's a fairly simple, but most importantly, I can start my work. So that's my very first step, is I'm going to launch this so that everyone that can monitor my work, anyone that can monitor what's going on inside of TopRate Edge, is aware that I'm in progress. I'm not going to submit this for review, obviously, because I've not accomplished my work. And now I'm actually going to go back to that import and export page and connect via JDBC, because I'm going to actually make a real-time connection to a MySQL database. It's available on the network, so I can just paste in my JDBC information here, type in my super secret username and password. I know the name of the database schema specifically that we're trying to pull is employees, and you can see it remembered that I am mapping into the correct data types definition. And I am also going to tell Edge I want all possible metadata. So I'm going to tell it to go ahead and profile, and I'm also going to bring in a sampling of this data. I'm just going to pull in 10 records, just in case it's not documented very well. People have bad practices, people need to get their work done. A lot of times these kinds of schemas don't have the comments, the definitions, and they don't even have very good naming conventions. So sometimes the best thing you can use is samplings of the actual data itself to determine what the type and nature of that column is. And with that, I can hit import. And while this runs, because I know there's a lot of data in there, while this runs, let's go back to our governance area there and make sure that the glossary that we'll be taking advantage of today is available to me. So I'm going to open that in a new tab and go back to my employee data domain. And you can see here from the iconology that I've got a lot of different data assets that I'm working with in the employee data domain. Take notice over here on the right-hand side, I've got a number 1 now next to our employee records that we created, and this is identifying that workflow that we just kicked off. So I always have convenience access to the work that I need to do from this page. So that's why it's kind of my preferred point of entry. And the icon up here, this is pointing out the glossary. And this is the glossary that we'll be using to help profile and connect and document our data source once it completes. So I can jump right into edit mode here, because I just want to go in and familiarize myself with what Jesse and Sean must have been doing in here. And for demo purposes, I know I really want to look at email address and employee ID today. So let's take a look at employee ID. This is a PII term. And on the right-hand side here, we can see a lot of metadata about it. We've got notes, we've got rich descriptions and definitions. The thing that I'm most excited about as a techie is that the business rule is actually written out. So I can actually read this and see that it's an alphanumeric. The first couple characters are going to be the alpha followed by the numerics. And really what's powerful about Edge is that this is great for discovery, connecting with APIs and answering these over in other workflows, even if necessary, seeing it here in TopRate Edge as well. But the real powerful thing that I think is the machine understandable rule. So TopRate Edge can actually take advantage of this business rule. And let's see what I mean by machine understandable. I can click on that and see metadata about that rule. And the most important piece is right here at the top. It's a regular expression pattern. So TopRate Edge actually can tell another system what that regex pattern is, that the value, that custom value should be matching to. And TopRate Edge can actually use it internally itself. And we'll see that against that sampling of data that I'm bringing in. So we'll see this in action here shortly. The other one that I pointed out was email address. So let's see email address, which is probably going to be laid out very similar. We've got some good descriptive metadata. We've got a very well-written business rule that explains the different components that make up an email address. And the rule is here as well. Now, unlike that custom written regular expression pattern for unique employee IDs, the email address rule is actually just pointing to is email address. So that reads kind of technical. What it is it's pointing at a Boolean value, and it's an internal function. So TopRate Edge comes with a slew of functions that you can take advantage of without writing any sort of custom pattern. So Phone numbers are easy to identify, and email addresses and others. And it's a library that you can also extend yourself and add those custom functions in there so that you can just call on them basically by name and have them set as a Boolean value. So at this point, I know we can really look and analyze our data, metadata, for email addresses and employee IDs. And I think this is great. This is a wonderful glossary. I'm going to use it. I'm going to take advantage of it today. So what I need to do is I need to build a dynamic relationship between that data asset collection, the employee records, in this glossary. And so all management of this glossary stays local to the glossary collection, but I can allow them to reference each other. And that's how TopRate Edge can say, look, I'm going to take this glossary and other assets to enrich and connect and build relationships. As Jack said, it's all about building connections. And that's what we want to do for our new data asset collection. So once again, I'm going to navigate back to my governance areas. And from there, I can access that employee records, and I'll go to the home page for employee records. And under settings, I can set up that dynamic relationship, that dynamic reference. And all I have to do is hit the includes. I'll get my small pop-up window here that allows me to, given my role or my permissions, these are the dynamic references that I can put into place. The only one I need today is the glossary. So the glossary that we were just looking at that had the ID and the email address in it is right here. And it's that simple. I'm done. Now, this data asset collection and all of its workflows have access to that glossary. And speaking of workflows, that's where we want to get back to getting busy. I can jump back over to that tab where we were loading, and you can see the JDBC connection actually finished. We've got an idea of samples. We know the table names and how much of that metadata there is. I'll click OK here and go into edit working copy. So now that I've got this container populated, this view gives me a nice way to actually navigate and search. I can filter down very conveniently. And there's also another filtering mechanism up here. This is all possible entities that are in a data asset collection. So I can also filter down here specifically if I want to, but I know what I'm looking for here. So I want to actually click on the database table. And the one I'm looking at is employees. I've got metadata here. And if you want an idea of the actual possible richness that TopRate Edge has out of the box, all you have to do is hit the edit button. So by clicking the edit button, you'll see a bunch of different categories of metadata, some of which is populated automatically. But this is an idea of the kind of connections that you can put in place. And traceability is an important one here to actually connect this table to requirements and data requirements, mapping to other concepts. This is just kind of the art of the possible here in what you can make sure that it's available. And it's customizable. So if it's too much metadata, it can be trimmed down. If you need custom metadata, it can be easily added to the model. And you can actually affect what categories your metadata shows up in as well. But I'll cancel out of there, and let's look at some of that sampling data for this table. And here you can see the thing I'd like to point out is employee ID. So that, if you remember that regular expression pattern, it was an alphanumeric. So that glossary is actually going to be able to connect to this field, hopefully based on these values. That way we have definitions on it. But I want to go look at that field first. So where is that column? That was the employee's ID column. I could search for it, but I can see it here on the screen. So I'm just going to click on it. And you see I've got a nice set of metadata coming directly because of that JDBC connection that we put into place. So we went over to that MySQL database, profiled it, brought that metadata back. But you can see I don't have comments. So there's nice metadata here, but I don't have a definition. I don't know when to use it or how it's supposed to be used. And that's really what that glossary term is for. And because my alert system is turned on here at the top. You can see I have one alert. Top rate edge is now making my job so easy that I know that 10 out of 10 samplings, 100% confidence that the employee ID column should be mapped to the employee ID glossary term. And all I have to do is apply that. By applying that, I now have a connection in place. So in addition to that regular metadata that you were seeing, I now no longer have any alerts going on because I accepted the one that I had. And here's the employee ID. And at any point that I need to know more about this column, or whenever another system, for example, needs to know the definition for this column, Top Rate Edge can basically answer it because it's mapped to this term. And you can get the human readable and the machine understandable version of that column to use in your system, in your documentation, or in your development. So this is the kind of thing that Top Rate Edge allows me to do. It makes my job a lot easier because everything I need to accomplish my job is here in Top Rate Edge. It's very easy to get that content into Top Rate Edge, and then it helps me whenever I am here. It helps me by making connections. So I would continue with this workflow using Top Rate Edge in this fashion, either by accepting automatic connections or manually connecting things to the glossary terms as I need to. And then I would commit that workflow, or I would actually submit that workflow for review, and Bob, our data governance officer, would basically be able to approve it, which would lead us to committing it, and that would resolve that task that we started with today. So that's how I would build up to finishing that task. All of my work would be getting documented and audited, so all of the changes in the system would be available, and you would really be able to look at that issue and say that it was resolved because the task was resolved, and all of the traceability would be in the system to prove that the issue was resolved, which keeps us going with good, solid policy management. Just changing hats here a little bit. This technique of building these connections, it's really helpful for also finding problems. So it's not always about, yes, that's a connection to a glossary term. I might actually be able to use this to find problems and document that in the system. And I was actually doing that earlier with the Northwinds data set. So let's go back to home again, navigate to our governance areas, navigate to the employees data domain, and the Northwinds data set is available here as well. And with Northwinds, from the home page, what I would like to do is show you that the reports tab. So what you saw me doing over in the other data asset collection was just incrementally working on each column by itself. So I worked with the employee's ID column and I connected it. But here what I can do is I can actually run a report and get a more convenient view of all of the problems and suggestions. And I just click on it and it runs. Now, what I've done is I've done this earlier, so it can take a little while to run. So I've already pre-populated this, and I'll click over to my tab. For Northwinds, this is what the problems and suggestions would come up as. And what's great here is I've got this notification that the notes column probably should map to email address. And we saw that email address. There's a function that's able to recognize the pattern that makes up an email address. And it's triggering here, and it's saying that the notes column should be getting that. Now that doesn't sound right to me, so I can click on notes. That's what would have loaded my metadata over here on the right-hand side, and the sampling data is what I want to go look at. So what I can do is I can click on the little arrow, which will launch me into a new tab. It'll take me directly to that table. So I can view the samplings of that table that the notes column was associated to. And right in the middle of the screen, if you look at the notes column, you can see, yep, it's right. Notes is basically being now used to capture email addresses. And what can I do about this? Well, I don't really own the Northwinds data set, so I could task somebody, I could start a workflow and pull the right people into it. But what I did earlier was I just simply created a comment. So I created a comment here saying that, I found email addresses, and I went one step further and I actually went back to the notes. I can filter down very, very quickly here to notes by typing into the filter text box, clicking on notes, and you'll see that there's a one here on the comment as well. and I documented it there. So it was a nice way for me to get the metadata, the information into the metadata that there could be an issue here, or there may be a design, somebody might want to facilitate some design to see if notes is being used properly, or see what applications are taking advantage of that field, so that we know kind of the upstream and downstream effect of the notes field if somebody was to change it. And that's all stuff that you can actually do here in Top Rate Edge. And I think with that, Jack, I'm done for the day. So I believe it's back to you.
All right, that's great, Jesse. If you bear with me just a sec, I want to bring up a screen. Okay, well, you've seen Jesse as Joseph complete a task that Bob assigned for him. And I just want to do one tiny little bit of demo before coming back into some closing and summary slides. Jesse pretended he was Joseph. I'm going to pretend that I'm Bob, because Bob assigned Joseph that task, and I want to be able to go into the system and verify as a data governance officer that these are being accomplished. So I'm going to log in here as Bob, and coming into the system, it's a server-based platform, so I'm going to see all the same information that Jesse was working on. And you can see up in the right-hand corner here, I'm logged in as Bob. If I click on my name, you can see that I have a role and some areas of interest in the system. And I'm going to go ahead to the data governance area, just like Joseph went to the employee data domain. And I see the same view that Jesse was looking at before. And you can see I have a couple of subject areas that are of interest to me. The employee data domain that I'm responsible for, product sales. And if I open that up, I can see, just as Jesse did, that he's the technical steward assigned to the employee data domain. If I click on that employee data domain, I can also notice here that there's a workflow active. It's the one that Jesse just started. And I didn't mention that the reason I'm really doing all of this is because that workflow, as Jesse progressed it for review, he didn't actually do that, but I would be notified by that workflow. And that's why I'm actually coming in to check right now. So I don't want to be involved in all of the really granular detail that Jesse got in. I want an overview. And to see that, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my dashboards. So I get a visualization of this. So I'm going to go up to metrics dashboard up here. And these are my dashboards. We can see that dashboards can be used for several purposes. You can see here there's a workflows tab, a governance roles. We can look at the various data elements that I'm responsible for. These dashboards will visually represent metrics that are of interest to me. I say me because they're personalizable. They're going to display the relevant metrics for my area and role, and they're also configurable. Different metrics can be established and displayed as needed. So I'm going to go and take a look at these data elements to give you a flavor of that. If you remember just a second ago, I said I was responsible as a data governance officer for product sales data and also for the employee data domain that Joseph was just working in. And so if I scroll down here, it's a lot of information on the screen, which is really good for me to capture at a glance. But you can see right here in the middle of the upper left chart are the employee records. And earlier, before I assigned this task to Joseph, this was missing. It wasn't here at all. And now I can see that 32 database columns were brought in, and it's in fact captured here as metadata. Well, that's great. And these subject areas, in these subject areas, an important metric for me to know about is that I want to see that metadata for the right databases has been captured. I've seen that. And I also want to see whether or not these have been mapped to glossary terms. And sure enough, we can see that there's mappings that have been taking place on the right. We can also see that perhaps not all of the data elements would be critical. And so it's very important to me to make sure that at least the critical data elements are mapped, and how many of those there might be, so I can task others if necessary. Finally, down here, with GDPR becoming increasingly important, it's very important for me to know organizationally which elements are personally identifiable information, and I get a little display of that as well. So I'm not going to go into any more detail, but gives you a flavor of what's possible to see at a high overview level. Again, if you bear with me, I'm going to pause this and switch back to the slides. And should be back on the slides. Jesse, can you see that?
Yeah, it's the demo review slides.
That's great, thanks. So I'm no longer Bob, just going to summarize what you've seen. And so Jesse came in as a technical data steward. You saw him collaborate on a task that was assigned to him by Bob. You've seen that he set up formal workflows to standardize notifications, review, and approval, and he was able to work in a sandbox rather than in the gold copy. He automated the cataloging and ingestion of this metadata and the profiling of it all at the same time, and was able, because of machine-readable business rules, to automate mappings to glossary terms to connect existing assets, the glossary, with these columns in the database for more understanding and meaningful reuse. Why is all that important? Well, it's important because in our larger organization, we're inevitably trying to reduce costs and improve our quality and efficiency. And that's what applying meaning to these enables. We can prevent people from using these employee IDs for the wrong purposes. And so preserving that meaning across the enterprise is essential. And it helps us to, as I said, reduce costs, but also to respond more effectively to new opportunities. Changing gears once again, a little bit of a flavor of how this happens. You've seen Jesse demonstrate how he could operate as a data steward to catalog important metadata and relationships, but the power and ability that Edge offers to do this actually lives in how Edge represents the data. Edge gathers all of these things and relationships that Jesse was talking about together to build extended networks called knowledge graphs. These things could be columns, they could be tables, they could be glossary terms, they could be business rules. All of these things relate to one another in an extended network. These knowledge graphs can tame complexity by making the relationships as important as the things that they connect. These graphs also manage identity by making both of these, the things and the relationships, unique and machine readable by other systems for reference, search enhancement, analysis, and good decision making. They do this simply and flexibly by using a collection of W3C standards that forms a common language to allow communication across departments and diverse siloed data context. These standards stack together in a system that allows us to say things, to share a common vocabulary for saying them, to meaningfully organize what it is that we're saying, to be able to query or ask about what's been said, and finally, to be able to verify or utilize all of this with any number of different types of rules. These standards afford data portability, interoperability, collaboration, and consistency across the enterprise. That's about as much of an overview as I can share in this short webinar about how these really capable technologies enable connection for us to redefine data governance. This gives you a flavor of just some of the categories of features that Edge has offered. We've shown you a few of these here with metadata and data ingestion, a little bit about discovery and profiling, but there's also a wide range of search and reporting and visualization capabilities, collaboration, and the ability for us to integrate with other systems through APIs, through jdbc connections, as you saw, all sorts of import and output capabilities. And this provides really enterprise-ready solution for working across different departmental needs. The benefit of all this, Edge in all these features provides a comprehensive governance capability because it's not just a tool. Edge is a complete pre-built semantic data governance framework. Edge models, features, and capabilities provide the coverage and flexibility and insight that are needed for effective data governance. We've spoken about Edge's flexibility and extensibility. Because of semantic standards, we can basically talk about any types of things and relationships that are needed. And because of knowledge graphs, we can map anything to anything. Edge minimizes what you have to design and create. Pre-built enterprise and governance models that you saw Jesse utilizing reduce cost and accelerate your work. And finally, these flexible connections enable complex query for meaningful insight, making other people's jobs and project easier as well. That's pretty much what we have to offer in the webinar today. And Christy, I'm going to turn it back to you to handle our question session.
Great. Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Jesse, for that demo. Let's take a look at the questions that we have coming in. And if you haven't already, please submit your questions and discussion points in the question box. It's located on the right-hand side control panel. Okay, if we're ready, let's see what questions we have. Okay, let's take this. Jesse, this may be for you. You showed a business glossary briefly with some useful fields built in. Can you tell us more about how glossaries are supported, and can different groups have a different glossary design in terms of the fields they want, etc.? Did you get that, Jesse?
I believe so, Christy. Thank you. Great question. The first thing I'd like to point out is the last webinar that we did in this series, which you can get from our website, and it should probably be linked in the slides when Christy sends them out. The last webinar really went over just that. And what it went over was, yes, Glossary is provided out of the box with Top Right Edge, which means there's a predefined model built that represents a glossary. And then that glossary can be connected and mapped in many different ways to other objects, things like Jack was just talking about at the end of the slides. But in addition to that pre-built model, you can extend it, and we do that in that webinar. We actually gave a glossary term a new relationship that it never had before. And you can create custom glossary model that you could use across, like, all of your glossaries had to use that model, or you could do more, isolated individual glossary could actually have its own special terms and relationships added to it. So yes, Top Right Edge has glossary out of the box, very rich. You don't often have to add anything, but anything that you do have that needs captured that's not already there, you can create a custom model, and then you can determine how that custom model is used, whether everyone has to use it or if certain governance areas can just take advantage of their own. But I would recommend watching the previous webinar or skipping through it, because it actually shows you the technique of creating a custom model and adding a new relationship into it.
Okay, great, thank you, Jesse. Jack, I'll throw one your way. Let's see, can you talk about the operational governance model in your tool and how it enables an organization to set up their particular governance model?
Sure.
Jack, can you take that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you actually saw a little bit of this in action. The fact that I was able to come in with a role as a data governance officer and to have that role relate meaningfully from an organizational perspective to Jesse's role as a technical steward, you were able to see that when Jesse and I went into the governance area and saw the hierarchy of how the subjects and roles were established. But that's possible because we have an actual model of governance in the background. And that model includes and enables you to set up custom charter statements, business areas, subject areas, roles, policies, workflows. All of these are possible because they're included within the structure of the product itself. And you can create your own roles and assign users to them. You can create your own templates for workflows and add these to the ones that are provided in Edge. Again, different subject areas can have different workflows, and all of these are related to each other because they're related inside of the Edge models to make all this possible. What this really speaks to is the notion that Jesse touched on a little bit, that governance involves several levels. There's bottom-up sort of governance, which is the granular level at which Jesse was linking things together, to glossary terms, to ingesting metadata, to bring them under governance. But at the top level, and you saw him touch on this when he just entered the work, at a higher level of governance, there's things like policies and goals and strategies, all of which have to align and harmonize with one another to accomplish governance. And you saw that they were available in the model. Jesse was able to navigate from an issue to the policy that it related to. And policies, issues, all can be created and assigned because they're available in the Edge governance model. Maybe that's a good place to stop. I might have overdone it, but there's a lot here, and it's a very rich capability to link high-level top-down data governance with bottom-up data governance with all the connections that you can actually create in the middle. Chrissy?
Great, thank you, Jack. Let's take this JDBC question, Jesse. This one's for you, I think. Did I understand correctly that JDBC makes live bidirectional connection to an external database so that data instances are actually stored in an external database while Edge can manage semantics of that data?
Yes, Christy, I tried to jump in and answer that one. Yes, that was correct. Top Rate Edge is not really interested in duplicating, right? So it wants to leave the data where it is, where it's operational, and it wants to help provide the semantics to that data. So you pull the metadata of those external data sources in through things like JDBC and a lot of other connectors and integration points that we have, RESTful APIs, JDBC, JMS, a lot of different connectors to pull the metadata in so you can connect it, provide that enrichment, and connect it, build bridges to things that you've never seen before so you can cross them and answer questions that you've never been able to answer before. Then those external systems or external workflows, user applications, whatever it is, you don't have to always just use the Top Rate Edge interface. You could actually embed connections into your existing workflows and just make API calls back across the Edge so you're always aware of what those semantics and those relationships and extra enrichment that you've never seen before. So yes, you are correct. It stayed where it belonged. We provided the extra semantics on top of it. We just got another one, Christy. Sorry to just jump right in, but I like the one about the APIs because I just touched on it. The question is, do you have APIs to access metadata within Edge? Absolutely. Very easy to just use what's provided out of the box. Any button that you saw me touch today was most likely API driven, which means you could actually do those micro transactions, creating new asset collections, creating new glossary term, deleting a glossary term. All of these things, given the right permissions and connections, are available via our RESTful API. Very easy to also take that and create saved searches and custom templates that you can turn into web services, all without taking the system down. These are all live deployed to Top Rate Edge. So you can use what's provided out of the box, and then you can always create your custom web services and have those exposed as well.
Yeah, if I can just emphasize that last thing that Jesse pointed out, because that's probably one of the most powerful aspects of Edge, is that unlike many APIs, which just expose certain standard calls for standard information, all of the information that is stored inside of Edge, whatever it is, whatever you've stored there, can be accessed by creating custom services that expose custom API calls. So pretty much anything that you want, if it's in Edge, it can be gotten out and be accessed through API. Christy?
Sorry, guys. Thank you for answering those questions, Jack and Jesse. I think it's probably a good time to close out the webinar today and thank everyone for joining us. We'll go ahead and answer. There were a couple of questions we didn't get to, so we will be providing those answers in the form of an email response to all of attendees so everyone can see that. We will also provide a link to the recorded presentation as well as sending today's slides. We hope you found today's information valuable, and we thank everyone for your attention and interest, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.